Hello, it's Yvonne from Quilting Jet Girl, and today I'm going to talk about how to work with directional fabric when you are making half square triangles or doing stitch and flip. This is one of my favorite go-to techniques to make sure that I've meticulously placed the fabrics in the orientation so that the print reads continuously even across piecing seams. So I'm going to be working with a Sawtooth Star block today, and you're going to see it in a couple of different configurations. The Sawtooth Star block that I'm working with today will finish at 8 inches square, so that means that once the pieces are sewn together, the block should measure 8.5 inches square. So the center of the square, if you're curious, is a 4.5 inch square, and then the outside edges are composed of either 2.5 inch squares or a 2.5 inch, and then a 4.5 by 2.5 inch rectangle, and then another 2.5 inch square. So those are the details of what we're going to be looking at. So let's go and take a look at how to do stitch and flip and half square triangles using the 2 at a time method when working with a directional print. To take a look at directional prints, I have cut out a Sawtooth Star, and we're going to take a look starting with stitch and flip technique. So this green center print has a very strong direction. It's running up and down, and I've already created the first 2 units for the sides of the star. They are flying geese units made using stitch and flip technique. Now the interesting thing about the flying star is that if I rotate this flying goose over here, you'll notice, and if I put them side by side, that the directionality really does show up, and that if I just switch their position, that in this case you can see that that is a misalignment and that the print isn't matching up. So the position of the prints within the points of the Sawtooth Star makes a big difference. So let's talk about how we can make sure that we get the alignment for the remaining 2 flying geese units nice and easily. So you can see the direction that the star points need to run very easily just by taking this side piece and putting it here, right? So we're going to need the same angles to happen. We'll need an angle here and an angle here. So if you have your square cut, in this case I do here, and I want it to cover and become the Sawtooth Star point on the upper portion of this block, all I have to do is draw an imaginary line in my mind going from the 2 corners where I'm going to sew from corner to corner for my stitch and flip. And once I have that figured out with it laying right side up, I grab those 2 corners of that square and I flip the block over, keeping those 2 corners in the same orientation. And then I would sew on the diagonal on that line, trim 1/4 inch away from that edge, and what happens is when I flip this edge back up, you can see that the print is running in the direction that I want. So I'm going to finger press to hold that piece there, and the same thing happens when we want to do the next side. So we've sewn this line, now it's time to add the square to this corner. So again, we've got the print going in the direction that we want, and this time we're going to be sewing from these 2 corners. So I just pick that up and I hold the 2 corners in the direction that I'm going to sew, and I flip that square over, keeping those corners in the same orientation. When I sew along that direction and trim, I will flip that back along this way and again get the orientation that I want. And the same process will happen for these 2 up here as well. So again, you place your block in the orientation that you want with the print going in the direction that you want. In this case, we're going to sew from this corner to here. So I pick up that square, I hold it in the 2 corners that I'm going to sew from, and I flip over, keeping those 2 corners in the same location. I sew from corner to corner. When that flips back, my print is running in the correct direction. Let's see if I can finger press that a little bit more convincingly so it wants to stay put. And then the same thing, get the print lined up the way I want, grab the 2 corners of the square, flip over, stitch, press, and you get the directional print running in the orientation that you want. So that's how it works when you're working with stitch and flip, and this will always be the case. You think about the angle that you're going to sew, right side up, you grab those 2 corners that you're going to grab and you flip the block over. Let's take a look at another Sawtooth Star variation where we work with half square triangles using the 2 at a time method. For this variation of the Sawtooth Star, I inverted the position of the fabrics. So for this case, the off-white fabric is going to be the star, and the directional print is now the background. So let's take a look at what it takes to combine two squares together in a 2 at a time half square triangle method to get the orientation that we want on the directional fabrics going the correct way. So I've already laid out a few of the half square triangles that I've made and arranged around the Sawtooth Star. And let's think about, in this upper position, the direction that we want the star point to run. In this case, we want the star point to run from this corner to this corner. And we want the directional print to be in the background, running vertically. So again, it's just like we did for the stitch and flip. When we know the two corners that we are going to be sewing from, you grab those two corners and then you flip the square over, keeping those two corners in the same orientation. In this case, once we mark our diagonal lines, we're going to create two half square triangles at the same time. The half square triangle that we're making for this point will flip back like this, and you'll see that the background print is going in the direction that we want. The second half square triangle will look like this. And here's the interesting thing. So if we try to turn this over and make the second half of this Sawtooth Star, you'll notice that it is not going in the correct direction to make the pear for this side of the Sawtooth Star. That's interesting. However, it is going to work really well to make this version of this side for the half square triangle over here. So you'll be making the points for here and here with the same half square triangle pair. So what does that mean? Does that mean that when we make this half square triangle, it will pair up over here? Let's take a look. So again, going through the same process, we know that the Sawtooth Star point is going to be running from here to here. So we'll place our directional print, and we know that we're going to be sewing from these two corners. So we'll grab those two corners, we'll flip the square over, keeping those corners in the same orientation. And then once we sew our lines to create our half square triangles, you can flip that back and you'll see that we'll have the directional print going the way that we want. And for the other half square triangle, it will look like this, just flipped over. And in that case, we can rotate this star point over here, and it'll make the correct pair for the second side of the star. So that is something to keep in mind when you are making half square triangles that have angles in your block that run in different directions. Because you're working with a directional print, it might not always pair up in the same way that you want, but if you have multiple angles within the block, oftentimes you'll be able to find the appropriate mate if you just keep twisting that half square triangle around and making it work.